My name is Bríona NicDhiarmada. I'm a professor here in Irish Studies and concurrent in film and television. And I am delighted to be here this evening to welcome Kevin McCann to Notre Dame. Kevin is one of our most exciting filmmakers and documentary makers. He's going to speak this evening about, he's going to show one showreel about his, which will tell us about his most recent project. Really exciting feature that he's developing, has been developing for the last number of years. He's got a number of very exciting actors already signed up for this. And I'll let Kevin let himself tell you about the film and why he's doing this. We're also going to have the opportunity to watch The Boys of St. Columns, which of course is based in Derry. Very famous school in Derry. And we have a wonderful link to St. Columns here in the Keough-Naughton Institute of Irish Studies through, of course, the personage of Seamus Deane, one of the founder members of the Keough-Naughton Institute. Seamus Deane was along with Seamus Heaney and Brian Friel, was one of the people that went to that school. As I say, we have that really heart link from Notre Dame and from Keough-Naughton back to St. Columns. We will also be watching a third short drama that Kevin did based on the border, and of course with Brexit and all that's going on, the uncertainty in Ireland around the whole Brexit issue, particularly on the border, I think it's very pertinent that Kevin is here to show us his film called Volkswagen Joe. Again, I just want to thank Mary Hendrickson and Patrick Griffin from the Keough-Naughton for letting this happen, for allowing this to happen, not only allowing it to happen, but supporting it and making it happen. I would like to introduce, again with my greatest pleasure, Kevin McCann.
Thank you, Bríona. Is it on? Yeah, I will repeat what Bríona said there about Seamus Deane, one of the founders of the Institute here for Irish Studies. When you meet somebody like Seamus Deane and many of the other great people that are featured in the documentary, you're never quite the same after meeting them, and they certainly, people like that up your game as a human being. They demand more of you, and it was certainly a great privilege to meet Seamus Deane and to work with him. I would like to thank Bríona and Patrick Griffin, Mary Hendrickson and Beth for looking after me here so well. It's a great privilege to be here. And also, it's worth pointing out that, I made this point earlier, but I'll repeat it again, that it really is a true honor to be here, because Notre Dame University have contributed in a very meaningful way to the story of Ireland being told and understood properly. Bríona produced a documentary in 1916 about the Easter Rising Rebellion and placed it in its context for the first time. I was in LA in 2016 watching it, and I actually cried when I was watching it, because I said, finally, for the first time, the story of Ireland is being told in its proper context, and we appreciate it in Ireland. I'm sure all Irish Americans appreciate it. The Irish all around the world. Bríona, you did an absolutely incredible job, and I wish you a great success with your next film as well. So, story. Why would one go down the road of trying to tell a story? Well, I believe that story has, or should have, a function in society. It ought to remind us about the mystery of life or the joy of living, but sometimes stories can be contained in drama, contained in documentary, history, mythology, fact, fiction. These are all words that sort of can all mean one thing, and that is story, the search for truth. I did a radio drama recently, and the log line, it was about a young boy in a coma, people going to talk to him, and the log line for the series was one man in a coma and the whole town wants to talk to him. Now, why are we interested in that line? What is it? I mean, to be honest, I don't know, but there's something in a line or in a story or in language that compels us, that communicates with our body. As Joseph Campbell would say, it's all about biological rather than up here. And that's what interests me as a writer and as a filmmaker, is to explore this area of story, why we need it, and how society can benefit from it. My work tends to, I'm from the border in Ireland, in between the north and the south. I was born in the north. My family were living in Enniskillen town, and there was an IRA bomb which blew up the apartment that my family were living in, and they weren't in it at the time, but thank God. But it forced my mother and father to consider moving across the border, because the 70s, early 70s especially, were a particularly difficult time. So I grew up, I was displaced by the violence of an IRA bomb, and I suppose I've been responding to it ever since through my work. And I'm interested in areas of history, faith, struggle, and some of the challenges that Ireland, North and South, have gone through. And being from the border, I suppose I learned to look at both sides of any situation, and perhaps not belonging to either side is also a consequence of that. When you're from the border in Ireland, people in the north are suspicious of you and people in the south are suspicious of you, so you end up being somewhere in the middle, and there is a border mentality that is something to well, it is a reality. In Ireland, we have a difficulty looking at about our history. Around 100 years ago, little less, Ireland was divided in two. The partition happened, and what happened then was, this is my view, that the Republic of Ireland got on with the business of being a new country, and in a sense, it forgot about the North. This is a controversial point, or a controversial view, that the Republic of Ireland was doing okay, or at least trying to form a new country after centuries of consistent oppression, and Northern Ireland was left to its own devices. And there's that unsettlement hasn't really been resolved. And we try to do it with our documentaries and our drama, and certainly I'll be looking at that with the boys at St. Columns, which you will see. As a writer and as a producer, not everything that I write, I'm sure there are many writers in the room, not everything that I write gets finished. Not everything that I develop as a producer gets produced. This film that I'm working on 1916, I've been working on it for 7 years, and there's been many highs and many lows, and I will continue on to make this film, because it is a film of such importance to me and to many people. A lot of writers and journalists in Ireland, this goes back a little bit to the misunderstanding or the disrespect that this whole subject gets sometimes. A lot of writers, a lot of journalists, I'm not going to mention their names, misremember, disregard, and often disrespect the story of Ireland, the story of the north of Ireland. And this is very regretful, but as we will discover in the Boys of St. Columns, we have to ask the question, why? Why does somebody not take on the history of Ireland with an open mind? Why are they closed-minded? So it's something to be aware of, that not everybody in Ireland is agreed that what I'm doing with the Rising is necessarily an important subject. And that's one of the challenges that we all face as filmmakers, is to get a certain amount of support, enough support to make it. I'm going to play for you a little clip of Orson Welles. Orson Welles directed the greatest film of all time. And I would ask you to listen to one word in particular, one word that he says twice, and that is nothing, nothing. He's talking here about the violence in this part of the world, the English imperial powers.
And violence always has been part of our story. It is, you know, I've seen it in my own lifetime long before this period, and we certainly read about it in history. That's the way we won the country and stole it away from the Indians and all the rest of it.
Is it? I wonder why it should be, though. There's any reason why the English, if they had had Indians in England before they were Englishmen there,
well,
that
they had some Indians in India.
Yes, they did, didn't they? Yeah.
And they had those kind of folks all over, and they, in some places, they brought the law and justice. And I've talked to people in other ex-colonies, nice people. When you mention the British, burst into tears of anger, literally tears of rage about our nice English cousins. So the bad things are true about them. They burnt the roofs off of the Irish and starved them out into the cold. There's nothing that you can think of that the English didn't do to that island right next door to them, to the Irish, over a period of 700 years. And we're English. Then we added a lot of other violent mixtures to the brew.
So, Orson is a man to be listened to, and that was his, there were his thoughts on the treatment of the Irish. He got his break in Ireland. I'd like to now talk about The Rising briefly, the film that I've been working on for about 7 years. And much to my shame, even 8 years ago, I knew very little about this part of Irish history, Sean McDermott in particular, Tom Clark. I had been somebody who sat at a bar in Ireland and said, raised my glass, and I said, fair play to Pearson, Connolly and Countess Margovich, but they didn't really know what they were doing. And this is a very popular abbreviation and understanding of a significant moment in the history of the empire and the history of Ireland. And yet it gets disrespected, disregarded all the time. And much to my shame, I was one of those people. So in doing this, it's taking a long time, or longer than I would prefer, but I'm certainly readdressing or redressing a wrong that I was doing for a lot of my life. I'm privileged to be working on the story of Sean McDhiarmada. He was the hero of Michael Collins. We've all heard of Michael Collins, but who was the man that Michael Collins respected most, looked up to? Before Michael Collins, there was Sean McDhiarmada, a remarkable individual who was executed along with the other leaders after the rebellion in 1916. Why make a film about the rebellion? Well, we're going through a decade of remembrance. We're more or less in the middle of it, 1913 to 1923. We're remembering that a century later. And two significant films were made about that period. There were three significant events: the rebellion, the War of Independence, and the ugly Civil War. And Neil Jordan made a Hollywood film, a good film about Michael Collins. 10 years later, a British filmmaker, Ken Loach, made a very good film called The Wind That Shakes the Barley about the Civil War. But nobody has made a film about the event that started that whole thing off, the Easter Rising Rebellion. Why? You got to ask the question, why? Countess Markievicz, Patrick Pearse, the proclamation, O'Donovan Rossa, the burial, and the fools, they've left us our Fenian dead. All these remarkable moments. Nobody has ever made a film in 100 years about that. Those remarkable people, those men and women that went against the greatest empire that the world has ever known. Why is that? I'm not sure, but we're trying to change that by telling the story in The Rising. And it's not a political film. It's not one of those dry Edwardian war dramas. There's something deeper, as we all sort of know about Ireland. There's something running through our blood. We don't know what it is. Is it Christianity? Is it story? Is it pain? Is it war? But there's something deeper, and that's what a film like The Rising must embrace. It's a biblical film. This, in a sense, is a biblical film. Sean McDiarmada was executed at the age of 33 at Easter time for trying to rise his people out of a darkness, out of a blackness. The people didn't understand what he was doing. They didn't want him to do it. There is a remarkable scene in our film where Sean and the other leaders, and this is all true, these wonderful, magnificent scenes of Irish history that have never been portrayed on film before. After the rebellion, during the rebellion, the British came in, blew the city to pieces because they didn't want word getting out around the empire that a rebellion had happened. And they arrested, after the surrender, Sean, Countess, all of these remarkable individuals, and they paraded them through the streets of Dublin. You can imagine the destroyed city of Dublin, ruins everywhere, smoke, fire, and the Irish people, their own people who they were trying to awaken, trying to free after centuries, were pelting them with sticks and spitting at them and booing at them. It's the walk to Calvary. It's exactly that same strength of story is in this story of The Rising that are in great stories such as the story of Christ. I'm convinced of it. It's not a political... If you start talking about The Rising and go through the little political elements of it, the whole argument of it will fall down. So we must embrace that strong story, as many Irish stories do. And that's, again, the truth of Ireland. And why tell the story of of a small country in what is the purpose? This week's Time magazine has got the Dalai Lama on it, and we look at a similar parallel of Tibet, tiny country under a great, or beside this great empire. We look at the stories of South Africa, oppressed in the apartheid regime, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, oppressed by communism, These are all stories similar to what we're talking about here on the Rising. The revisionists and the journalists and the modernists and the people that disregard the story of the Rising and what Patrick Pearse and the rebels did, they would, generally speaking, have little time for this grandiose representation of, they would much rather it be forgotten about and just, it's not a, because if you embrace this story of 1916, are you supporting some, you know, where did they get their mandate to launch a rebellion? Well, the same could be said for the British Empire. Where did they get their mandate for those centuries of oppression? But some people, many of them Irish, unfortunately, make apologies for one side and come down on their own people who really were trying to, they were seeking freedom. And as Frederick Douglass would have said, what is Frederick Douglass's lines about? Yes, the only thing worse than rebellion is what causes rebellion. He also had a line about power concedes nothing without a demand, never did and it never will. Some people think that they should have gone a political road and wait for home rule to happen. Perfidious Albion, as Yeats says, of what England may do in his poem in 1916, but there's a very important line in Yeats' Easter 1916, one word, may. England may give us what we want, but it's highly unlikely. So essentially this is a story of a man who changed Ireland by his, there's a great title of, in this from, about the Dalai Lama, and the title of the article is Test of Faith. And I suppose we all have that at various stages in our lives, a test of our faith in many, many things. And that's what Sean is. It's a story of the man who changed Ireland. He awakened Ireland, he awakened his people. And it's a story for, not just for Ireland and the Irish, but it's a story for the entire world, for the people. And I think that story has a function in society to change the way we look upon ourselves. This can help Ireland look at itself differently. And what is Ireland? Misha Era is what Patrick Pearse said. I am Ireland. So you are Ireland and we are Ireland. The Rising must be made for 3 reasons, and I've written them down so I don't forget them. We do have a remarkable script that asks us, that tells us the story of Ireland with all that wonderful talent attached and more to come. We are in a decade of remembrance that asks us to respect their memory. In other words, now is the time to tell this story. It has never been told before in a motion picture. Again, why? If this was a story from another culture, another country, would they have done it 50 years ago? Why have the Irish not done it? Why have they not got together? The Irish Americans, the story of America and Ireland is remarkable. The Irish in America funded the rebellion. They helped us in war. They also helped us in peace. The contribution of the US to the peace process in Northern Ireland cannot be ignored or cannot be underestimated. It was absolutely remarkable. They helped us reach our peace, and we are very grateful to America for that, and the Irish Americans that contributed to that. And finally, the Rising must be made for Ireland to heal. I'm going to play you 2 minutes of a slideshow with some piano music. As a writer and as a producer, sometimes we look for different ways of motivating ourselves into a story or trying to imagine it. I was having a conversation with Bríona, wonderful conversations today. One of them was about language and the limitations of language. In The Rising, one of the important elements is, this is remarkable, Ben Bulben Mountain in County Sligo, but is the communication. A young Sean McDiarmid finds inscribed on a rock Celtic symbols. Now, we don't know what they mean. We can guess, and people can say, well, it's about this, it's about that. There's a wonderful Triskel symbol. Some of you may be familiar with it. O'Rourke's pub have it all over their window. And what do those three intertwining spirals mean? Father, Son, Holy Ghost, life, death, rebirth, mind, body, soul. We're not quite sure. But somehow, if we just push language to the side, we sort of know what it means. Is it something to do with eternity, the eternal, that life goes on? I'm not sure, but... So I'll play you this last, if I can see it. So this is 2 minutes. So in conclusion, I hope that conversations around the world will start something like this. What's the story of Ireland? The story of Ireland is contained. If you want to know the story of Ireland, there is a great documentary series made by Notre Dame that tells you the story of Ireland. And there is also a drama called The Rising that also tells you the story. And we are completing that trilogy. The Rising, Michael Collins, The Wind That Shakes the Barley. That is the story of how Ireland went from a famine Ireland to a free Ireland.